Again, thank you so much. Welcome. Today, you are with Sustainable Tulsa and our First Thursday program. Today, you're attending First Thursday on Intersectional Environmentalism, the key to fighting racism and climate change. We're really excited to be able to bring this topic and program to you today. So thank you for joining us. But before we get started, I want to say thank you for also being here and hope that you're each staying safe and healthy. It feels like the world's is starting to open back up, and we're looking forward to seeing you all very soon. Megan's going to launch a poll right now. So if you don't mind, take a few moments to answer those questions while we continue to get started here. So I want to thank our program sponsors today. Our lead sponsor is Williams. Our neighborhood partner is PSO and also Oklahoma PSO WinChoice. So thank you to them. And our community advocates are American Waste Control, Covanta, the Met, One Oak, Save Our Streams, Spirit Air Systems, and the Tulsa Farmers Market. So really glad to have them all here with us today, and if you know them, thank them in the chat for supporting this program. We appreciate their support. I also want to thank my board members that are here with us today. We have Wayne Isaacs, Carolyn Janney, Rick Katarski, Aaron Larder, Carrie Rowland, Pam Taylor, Mike Teague, and James Williams. Thank you all for joining us. Give them a virtual round of applause for their support and leadership and the work that they do in their own worlds around sustainability and supporting the work we do. So thank you to them. I also want to thank my amazing team, Megan Hurley, Teresa Kerrigan, Joe Maud, Erica Gavula, and our summer interns, Sam Bauschke and Denise Ford. We're really glad to have them with us today. So send them a welcome in the chat there. They're going to be doing some research on sustainability for us this summer, and we're excited to have them on the team. So more information, becoming a supporter of Sustainable Tulsa course is easier than ever online. For $25, your name can be added to our growing list of change makers in our community. We do bring this program to you for free, but it does cost to maintain, and we would appreciate your support. Thank you for considering that. We'd love to have your support. Also, we have our Scorecard final event. We held our next event will be June Thursday, the 24th, and it'll be from 11 to 1. So make note of that. It's a little different time frame, 11 to 1. It'll be online again this year. And we'll be celebrating, though, the successes of our Scorecard members in the 2020-2021 cycle and all their sustainability achievements over the past year. So come out and support them. And also, if you're considering joining Scorecard, it's a great way to get an idea of what other teams are working on, and we're excited to share the good news that they're working on. So please sign up for that event. I think Teresa's putting that link in the chat right now for you. Also, our next First Thursday will be held Thursday, July 1st, and our guest speakers right now are Pat Gwynn with Cherokee Nations Environmental Resources and Dr. Clint Carroll, Associate Professor at Native American Indigenous Studies at the University of Colorado in Boulder. So we're really excited about bringing this program to you July 1st. So registration's open today. So Teresa put that in the chat for you. So go ahead and get signed up and continue this conversation around sustainability with us. Our fourth annual Recharge fundraising is coming up. It supports all of our programming, and that event will be held online again this year with a special guest. We're really excited, world-renowned photographer for National Geographic and Photo Art, Joel Sartori. If you're not familiar with his photography, somebody may be able to put a link in there so you can see, but really amazing. He's been through Tulsa several times, so really excited to see what he has to share with us. Tickets are on sale now, and sponsorship starts at just $1,000. So please join us. We'd love to have you help with that support and be a part of that program for Recharge. We'll also, right before Recharge, we're going to host our first in-person First Thursday since the pandemic. So it's been over 16 months now, I think. It'll be Thursday, September 2nd, and it'll be at the Gathering Place. So it'll be outside. This will be an evening First Thursday event, and we cannot wait to see you all there in person. It'd be great to see everyone. Sustainable Tulsa launched our Facebook group in January of this year to help connect our community. If you would like to connect with sustainability-minded people, continue the conversation from today and our other programs, join the Facebook group. Tracy will put that link in the chat for you. It's a great way to share ideas, ask questions, and have that support that you're looking for. Now, I'm going to turn the mic over to Megan. She's going to introduce a couple of our digital booths. So, Megan.
Thank you, Corey. I appreciate that. Do we have Carrie on the phone with us today, or Tracy? Hello, anybody? Okay, they're probably not on.
Yes.
Oh, there we are.
This is Tracy.
Hey.
I'm here.
Hi, stranger. Nice to hear your voice.
Hey, thank you.
I know we've got residential AC tune-ups that just happened here in May, but I just wanted to see if you had any program updates for us.
Yes, we have our residential AC tune-up program going. So PSO is paying for diagnostic tune-ups and clean outside condensers up to $75 rebate. Clean coil with no rinse and spray, $50. And also you can see $25 towards refrigerant. So you can find out more on that at powerforwardwithpso.com. And it's been really hot, so it's a perfect time to get that AC tune-up going into the summer cooling season.
We've been very lucky on the weather, but it is muggy this week. So definitely a perfect time to get that checked out. Thank you so much, Tracy. It's good to hear your voice. Oh, and I know you manage the WinChoice program. So I know that amazing things are happening over at WinChoice right now. So is there anything, other program updates for WinChoice?
Yes, so I'm excited to say, if you haven't heard, we just brought a new wind farm online back in April. It's called Sundance, and it's located out in western Oklahoma, out in Woods County, and we have 2 more wind farms in the works scheduled to come online later this year and then first quarter of next year. So once those come online, around 1/3 of the capacity on our grid will come from wind generation right here, generated in our great state of Oklahoma. So WinChoice, though, is a voluntary option. If you haven't signed on to your account at psoklahoma.com, you can sign up for WinChoice. You can get 100% of your energy as WinChoice. And you can, if you don't want to do 100%, you can do only like 1%. You can totally pick your range and customize it to whatever you want. And the cost is lower than ever. It's, you know, for most people, for their house, it's less than a couple dollars extra per month. So you can go to psoklahoma.com/WinChoice or message me if you have any questions. I'd love to talk to you about it.
It's such a great program. We so appreciate having this in the state of Oklahoma, and it's our own wind. I guess it's the world's wind, but it is nice that it's employing jobs here in Oklahoma, employing our Oklahomans. So, all right, up next we have American Waste Control. Jessica, are you on with us? Or Amanda? I didn't see either one of them, but they may have jumped on before. If you are familiar with American Waste Control, of course, they handle our recycling streams here in Tulsa County. We're so happy to have them on board with us. American Waste Control also is now doing wood recycling in the industrial industries. So fantastic. If you'd like more information about anything with American Waste Control, please contact Amanda Curtis at amanda@awcok.com. And I know that they do have the Mr. Murphs all over town. So if you haven't seen a Mr. Murph and would like more information, go to AmericanWasteControl.com to find one of the locations. Up next, we have the Met. Is Allie with us? I'm batting 1,000 today. Allie with the Met, she's the Met educator. Just wanted to give you guys an update. Of course, we know that we have Tulsa Recycling Center is undergoing repairs due to a fire on April 1st. So what you can do right now to ensure that all of your recycling is 100% recycled is taking it to one of the Met locations. There's a map right there. You can also go to metrecycle.com or I believe .org to find out more information. So the Met, thank you so much for filling the gap right now. And of course, all of the wonderful work that you do. I'm going to turn this over to Jacob because I know he's on with us today. Jacob, do you have any updates from the Household Pollutant Collection Facility or Save Our Streams?
Actually, is Janelle Hartwell on today as well?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Janelle, welcome. You're our new rep, aren't you?
Yes.
Welcome. Congratulations on the new position. Would you be happy to give us an update today?
Sure. So we recently remodeled our swap shop, which is part of our household pollution collection facility. It's located on the west side of Tulsa at 4502 South Galveston Avenue. Open, of course, Wednesdays and Saturdays from 8 to 4:30. You can bring any of your household pollutants by, and any of the material that's been brought in that's still in good condition, we put in our swap shop. So I also want to put a plug in for the swap shop, which you can take up to 5 items out for free if you bring items in to be recycled.
That swap shop is so cool. I love it. So if you are trying to get rid of chemicals or any of the household pollutants, but they're still good to use, you take them there to the swap shop. Maybe you need something that you don't need a full can of. Well, go check it out at the swap shop. It's really incredible. So, and of course you don't need an appointment anymore, correct? To come drop things off. So perfect. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you next month as well. Okay, and then Gabrielle, are you on?
I am.
Hi, you're going to give us a quick update?
Well, I guess it's not really an update. I just kind of wanted to mention our yard by yard program. We're trying to promote healthy yards in and around Tulsa County. Promoting, native plants, native grasses, that kind of thing. We'll usually come out and take a look at what you got going on as far as composting goes, or any other type of healthy yard practices that we have on a checklist. And once we do that, we'll give you an awesome looking sign that you can show your neighbors and give you some free wild packet seeds for you and a friend. And yeah, and if you refer anybody, you can get a really awesome shirt. So we're just, yeah, I have them in my spare room right now.
Perfect. Perfect.
Store.
Do you mind dropping a link in there about your yard by yard project? That it's a really exciting event that's happening, and thank you so much for everything that you're doing to help. So at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to Corey. Thanks, Corey.
Thank you so much. I will.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for all the updates and all the great ways to get involved and be a part of the sustainability solution here in the Tulsa area in Oklahoma. So today, it is my honor to introduce Emily Pinckney to share with you about intersectionality and environmentalism. And, this topic can be uncomfortable for some, and I hope each of you are here to listen and learn, and we'll continue this conversation following this program. And again, it's my honor to introduce Emily Pinckney. She grew up in Washington on ancestral land of Puyallup tribal land, where she spent 26 years of her life. She attended Humboldt State University, and Duke University. She graduated with a degree in marine biology and conservation. She has completed research at the University of Texas, Fordham University, and the Smithsonian. Her areas of study included local extinction events, biodiversity loss from climate change, human impacts on marine environments, systems of subjugation like racism, sexism, etc., on climate change and using empathy as a tool of conservation behavioral change. Her experience as an underrepresented scientist led her to focus her efforts on promoting environmental justice principles and equity in the environment. She guides underserved communities on how to navigate around systems, barriers to community-based decision-making. She currently serves on the Washington State Environmental Justice Task Force, Sustainable Tacoma Commission, 500 Women Scientists, and the Tacoma Urban League Young Professionals. After working in research space, Emily moved to zoo and aquarium learning institutes at the community outreach educator for the Seattle Aquarium, and now the youth volunteer coordinator and part of the Diversity, Equity, Accessibility, and Inclusion, DEAI team at Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium. Emily, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Sorry I gave you so much information. I was like, oh my gosh, that was a lot in my bio. Sorry about that. That was a lot. But yeah, thank you all for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'm really excited to talk about this. My name is Emily. Like Corey said, I use she, her pronouns. And just before we get started, I like to do a land acknowledgement. And I know that for some folks, that may be something that's very new or something that you've heard before. But part of the reason I do land acknowledgements is because when it comes to environmental justice, we have to acknowledge a lot of the past colonialism and pain and the things that we've done to this planet and the people who are on it. So for me today, I am sitting on Puyallup tribal land, which is part of the Salish Seas in Washington. This land has been degraded and taken over by Euro invaders. And part of doing the acknowledgement, it's just one small step towards allyship. But when we do that, again, we're acknowledging what folks have been through and making sure that when we move in the future, we move in the future together. Their culture, who they are still very much alive today. They have not been erased, even after all the years of oppression, everything and all the suffering they've been through. They are resilient and they deserve our respect and they deserve to be a part of our decisions, especially I know in states like Washington, where we do have a huge tribal presence and they are part of all of our decision making. So thank you all. And now I'm going to share my screen. Okay, here we go. All right, can folks see this? Thumbs up, yes? Perfect. Okay, so yeah, like I said today, so I'm gonna be talking about intersectional environmentalism. And I think some folks are probably here like, I thought we were going to be talking about environmental justice. And what I like to remind folks is that environmental justice is the goal. We want to get to justice, and justice is also something we continue to fight for and will continue to fight for some time. We have hundreds of years of oppression that are right now currently happening and that are also in our rear view. And so to get to this point, we need to figure out the tools. Intersectional environmentalism is a tool to get there, and it's the key to fighting racism and climate change. So you're probably asking yourself, like, what is intersectional environmentalism? And so it's this inclusive form of environmentalism that advocates for the protection of people and planet, which is something that I think we don't really think about. When we thought about the environmental movement, when we think of nature, when we think of the outdoors, we think of wild spaces. And when we think of that, we don't necessarily think of people being in that. That idea has actually come about because of things like white supremacy, which have separated us from it, making nature something that can be used, making nature just a resource, making it something that's separate from us. But what we need to understand is we all breathe air, we all drink water, we're very much a part of this earth. And so when we think about it in this way, we can more prioritize our needs. It identifies the ways in which injustices have been affecting marginalized communities and Mother Earth that are interconnected. A lot of communities that we also need to think about that are the most marginalized are also communities that have strong ties and tethers to nature in things like their storytelling. For instance, like I said, I live in Washington State, where our native tribes are a lot more empowered than other states. We do still deal with a lot of erasure. We do still deal with a lot of oppression, but that storytelling has helped us a lot. Me, as a marine biologist and scientist, have learned a lot from folks who've lived on this land since the beginning of time. Intersectional environmentalism not only acknowledges the links between environment and people, but it also brings that to the forefront of the activism. For instance, it's great that we have programs like, banning plastic bags and getting rid of styrofoam and all that. But some of the movements that have been brought about by communities of color, like for instance, if we look at places like Flint, Michigan, that haven't had clean water, that has sparked a national and international conversation in a way that the tiny plastic bag campaign that I had in my city of Tacoma won't be acknowledged on that scale. And without minimizing or silencing those voices in discrete forms of oppression. And so what that means is that when we think of like environmental orgs, or when we think about movements, who are the people that are at the front of the conversation? Who are the people that are at the table when we have that conversation? And I'll get more into that. And so I think that, there's a lot of buzzwords coming out right now because of coronavirus and because it forced the entire world to stop. We've all kind of reflected and thought about who we are and what our priorities are going forward as an entire globe of people, but especially within our own spaces. Who are we and who do we want to be? And I think a lot of people are starting to change and shift their priorities. It's very bittersweet that it took for a global pandemic for us to get here, but now we're here and now it's time for us to make this type of change. And so right now, what we're looking at in the environmental movement is we're starting to see that there's power in people and that health is an asset to the entire community. Coronavirus is a respiratory illness. So if you live in a community that has a lot of air pollution, the people who are impacted the most by it are going to be the ones most at risk for getting this disease. And so that was something that was an update, something for our community to see and say, you know what, we need to change what our priorities are. And then also helping people to figure out how to change these social norms. I mean, it's a norm, I know for my community anyways, to be very reliant on some organizations or industries or companies that haven't prioritized our health for a very long time. And so now you're having companies, organizations, and industries starting to rethink how they go about their business and what they do and what they're doing for their people. But at the end of the day, this is something for us to all make our world a better place. And this is something, sorry, I have to move all of our faces out of the way here, but like something that at our local level, like it's about fostering that collaboration between people and institutions. Like for a very long time, it's been about what decisions have been made for us and what options are there for us that have been given to us. But now having people being a part of it is what makes this a movement and what means that this is not going to leave. And so I put here, like, what does intersectional environmentalism look like? And it looks like many different things. These are just 4 examples, but it really is a lot of different things. So like, for instance, eliminating racism and those systems of subjugation. What is a system of subjugation? That means different forms of oppression to different groups. So like racism, sexism, homophobia, even things like fat phobia. All of those things are within these systems. And someone might be asking themselves, well, if I'm fighting, against voter suppression, how will that help environmentalism? You're now giving a voice to people who have been voiceless. And when we look at the data, like groups of people who've actually voted more in favor for things that are pro-environment have actually been those marginalized communities that have been impacted by the pollution the most. Also, as I'm going through this presentation, if people have any questions, please put them in the chat box. I know for me, I've been very inundated in a lot of this work. And so there might be some terminology or language that I'm using. And if it doesn't make sense, please feel free to ask. I love answering questions. And then also eliminating all the exploitative actions that have been done to our land. And this is things like fossil fuel extraction or degradation of ecosystems. And then also making sure that we're restoring those sites that have already been exploited. A huge part, like I said, of intersectional environmentalism is that the planet and the land is very much connected to groups of people. Where we live is who we are. Where we're place-based is part of who we are and where we come from. And so when you exploit something that's someone's home, you're exploiting them always. Another form is like food sovereignty. Food sovereignty is thinking about things like food deserts. And I know, talking to Megan and Corey, it sounds like you guys have some food deserts out there. I know one of the neighborhoods that I lived in for a very long time was in South Tacoma. The only thing that we had were corner stores and fast food restaurants. And especially for the folks who live in those areas, there are folks who were traditionally more low income, folks who didn't own their own land, so they couldn't even grow their own food, or folks who didn't have land at all. Food sovereignty also means teaching and educating people to do things like grow their own food. But there's so many intricacies to that, and getting people to be able to be free to make those decisions on their own, especially when it comes to healthy food choices. That's also intersectional environmentalism. And then acknowledging all the past and current acts of colonialism, oppression, and subjugation. These are just some of the strategies that you can use to have environmentalism that's more inclusive of different groups of folks. You can't have climate justice without racial justice. It's just, there's no way it can happen. Because like I said, the ways in which we've been fighting climate change and a lot of the strategies that we've used have not included every single person. Not everyone's been a part of the conversation. So let me give you a couple of examples. So like we see things coming out right now about New Green Deal or the Green New Deal, and not just like nationally, but there's a lot of different local ones. This is something that we're actually working on in my city of Tacoma, as well as I know the city of Seattle and a couple other cities in Washington. We're also talking about a statewide one, which we kind of already working on, and I'll get to that. It's called the HEAL Act. Really cool, really inclusive and very collaborative. But part of this is like, these are reparations. And I think when people hear reparations, they get really nervous. It's hard for them to have the conversation. Like, what does that mean? Is that just a check in the mail? Like, reparations look so many different ways, but it does have a lot of money behind it. And that's the important part, is you have to put your money where your mouth is. You have to put your skin in the game. And that's part of making sure that you're giving that promise to folks who have been oppressed. But that looks like a bunch of different things. That looks like education. So making sure that there's education for folks to actually be a part of these conversations, whether that's education around the environment, education around oppression, and education in science. So that when we do move forward as a group of people, as an entire community, that if we're going to have a conversation about green jobs, people know how to do those green jobs, and that you can hire folks and give them those options. And that's when we get to training and jobs. That's another form of reparations. And a lot of times what happens, like I said, is that people who are the most impacted are not a part of it, ever. It's also housing and transportation, making sure that people live near where they work. Like I said, I'm from Tacoma, and we have a lot of people who commute back and forth to Seattle all the time. It's about 2 hours drive going back and forth, and you have to do it in the morning and at night. And it's really, really long. And like not living near your home, it like increases your carbon footprint. We all know this when you have to drive back and forth all the time. That's a housing injustice if you can't live near where you work. And then you have transportation justice. For instance, the city of Seattle, you can't park anywhere. So even if you have a car, you have to take the bus, which means you're now increasing the amount of time that it takes to go to and from work. And we all know that time is money, but time is also yours to be had. And people who are in marginalized communities don't have the luxury of time. And so that's why that's also a reparation. And then you have health resources. We have been polluting this planet for so long. And like we're going through this global pandemic where it's a respiratory illness. In my community, kids have a 30% more chance of having asthma than the community that's only 10 minutes away, but is more affluent. It makes no sense at all. Also too, in terms of our longevity of life, 10 minutes away where the more affluent community is, they have 10 more years longevity than the community in which I live in, which doesn't make any sense at all. And some of these kids go to the same schools, but some of them, they grow up thinking that all kids have asthma. So health resources is a huge thing as well. And then also political power. That is also a form of reparations. The way in which we have conversations or we start working on some initiatives or we start working on some bills, people aren't at the table. Making sure that the time in which we have community sessions are when people can get to them, making sure they're not at work, making sure that there's childcare, making sure that there's food available, because people have lives and families. And those are the people that we need to be at the table because they're the ones who have the most lived experience to tell us what's right and what's wrong for their environment and their homes. So here's an example. So I'm from the city of Tacoma, love it, grew up there. I think it's an absolutely beautiful place. We are right between, we have all these beautiful trees. We're right next to the water. It's even if you don't live by the water, if you live in Tacoma, you live at least 10 minutes from the water. It's absolutely beautiful. Back in 2010, we had about, I want to say 200,000 people on the census. Now we are getting closer to 500,000. And that's because Seattle has had this huge technology boom. So there's a lot of people moving to the area. And Tacoma is a more affordable option for a lot of folks. But there's also a lot of people who've been gentrified out of the city of Seattle. A huge thing in Tacoma, though, is that we have such a rich history. We are located on Puyallup tribal land, and the Puyallup tribe has been a lot of the decision making. They are probably also one of the most powerful tribes that's in Washington state in terms of political power, financing, and they help support other tribes as well. So what ended up happening in our city is that we decided to put in this liquefied natural gas plant that was supported by Puget Sound Energy. Part of the problem is that we know that a lot of tribal rights, especially within our state, have been violated for a very long time. The liquefied natural gas plant, they decided to put it in a place that not only was on like a fault line, which is already dangerous just in general, but it was located across from a Chinook landing. And when I say that, I mean, that's a place where salmon go in and out from freshwater sources to saltwater sources. And for folks who know anything about Washington, is we're big on fish. We get a lot of money from fish. It's a huge part of our culture, especially salmon is a huge animal for our tribes. We have something in our laws that protect tribal resources, and the fish are one of those. That was all violated and people were not consulted. This is what makes it an environmental injustice, is that there was no communication, that did not happen. And so it created this huge national and international spark because we had people chaining themselves to cranes. We had people standing in the way of the operations, standing in construction sites because they said, you're putting this on our land without permission. Because for us, it may seem like a good decision for the city because, okay, we're going to make some money, we might create some jobs, but you're also degrading the land, which for the tribe is them. And that's what the problem is with some of these environmental injustices, is we are not looking from other people's perspective. This is why I look at empathy as a form of conservation behavior change, is because understanding people and their motives in the environment is one of the most important parts to understanding how we can fight climate change. So like I said, this happened without their permission and they've been protesting it still. It's still up there. It's also next to the largest detention center in the Pacific Northwest, which we know, especially our detention center, the ICE detention center up there, is full of immigrants. So if anything happens in terms of like any sort of leak, any sort of explosion, it's going to impact the tribe and it's going to impact immigrants. And because it's on a fault line, it makes it extra dangerous. And so it's also polluting as well. And so the reason why we had so many problems, again, is because there was just no consultation at all. So what started to happen was this community-based like mobilization and research. Money and time and energy started to go in doing independent research outside of what was happening from the situation. So the tribe hired folks, and then local folks within the city also hired folks to do this community-based research and get everybody's input on where to go next. Since this has happened, the city has made an apology. The Port of Tacoma has made an apology. They also created a group where it's the Port of Tacoma, City of Tacoma, and Puyallup Tribe at the table, having a conversation and making sure that they're doing environmental impact statements. And now we have a lot of regulations, and I will say it's definitely still up in the air, it's particularly in the city, on where we're gonna go next. But the important part is that we acknowledge the pain that we put these people through. We acknowledged what we did was wrong, and we also made the decision to invite them to the conversation and let them lead it. And so now the city has created an Environmental Justice Council. The important part about the council is it not only includes members of the tribe, it includes members of my community, which is the Hilltop, a historical Black neighborhood. It includes members who are from the disability community, queer communities, environmental justice leaders, folks who've lived in low income, folks who've lived in homelessness. And it also offers to pay people a stipend for their time and energy. It pays that. It also makes sure that they have childcare, make sure they have food, because all these barriers are why we haven't had a full view of how to do environmentalism right. And then there's the state of Washington example. So like Corey said earlier, so I was a part of the Washington Environmental Justice Task Force. We still have our task force, but we've done our recommendations since. This is probably one of the most incredible and inclusive experiences that I've been able to be a part of in my time working in policy. So Governor Inslee got a group of people together, and there was folks chosen from each agency, so Department of Agriculture, Department of Ecology, Department of Commerce, and had a representative from each, and then also 3 community members, and I was one of those. And usually you don't have community members on these task forces. And so he decided to get these folks together and said that, you know, what we're going to end up doing is we're going to have recommendations to talk to each one of these agencies about how environmental justice can look and all the work that we do. So how we started the process is we had this Black-led environmental justice organization help create these focus groups to create an EJ mapping tool. The environmental justice mapping tool was really cool because it involved community the whole time. I really loved what they did and how they went about it. They would show up to Black and brown churches. They went to, because we're in Washington State, we have a large Asian immigrant population. So they went to a couple of different places. They went to like, Korean karaoke bars. They went to Chinese churches. They went to the Buddhist temple. But they went everywhere, and they went to all these different groups of people and said, this is your gathering place. This is where you guys celebrate each other, celebrate culture. What do you guys want to see in your environment? What are the metrics that you're looking for? And so this was a truly collaborative tool, and people met people where they were at. A lot of times we say, here's a public forum, come at this time. You can't just ask people to show up to your space. The important part about involving people is going to their space and humbling yourself, saying, we need your input to be able to make the community better for you, everyone like you, and for us. And so this was just a really cool experience. And this maybe took about, I want to say 3 years. We worked with the University of Washington to create this tool, which I will show you on the next page, but it talks about health disparities. One thing that we realized that I think a lot of groups are realizing is that to have a conversation about environmentalism and to get everybody on board is to talk about health, because health impacts us all. The environment impacts all of our health. And so having that be a part of the conversation was such an important piece. And having all these different perspectives finally gave us this full picture. Like I said, though, after we created that tool became a key piece to guiding the Environmental Justice Task Force. We made recommendations about tearing down different barriers of participation, like I mentioned earlier, childcare, food, even things like transportation. If we're going to ask the community to be here, are we going to pay for their bus fees? We want them here. We need their input. Because at the end of the day, if the environment is clean for everybody, then it's clean for everybody. We can't just push it into certain neighborhoods because like I said, wind blows, water flows, it will get to everyone's backyard. So we need to make sure that everyone was in that conversation. But like I said, we use this as our tool, and for about a year, we would meet, and COVID happened in between. So we started to meet digitally, which actually made it more accessible for people all across Washington to be there. But we started to assist the government in these community gatherings and getting people's perspective, and created an over 100-page document about what we recommend. And in there, we even had a reparations memo talking about all the pain and suffering that happened to different groups in Washington, including Chinese internment, Japanese internment, and the internment and enslavement of indigenous tribes. And we put that in there. And the reason I mention that is because there's a lot of government policy that is way too scared to put words like reparation and climate change in their policy. When you don't do that and don't acknowledge it, then it seems like it doesn't exist, and it erases people's past and pain, which are a part of the conversation. And so adding that was vital. And now, about a month ago, Governor Inslee signed the HEAL Act, which I'm very happy, because that was about 4 years in the making, right before the task force and the EJ mapping tool was created. It's last month, seeing him sign that, like, there were people crying, people in tears. It was what folks may call a radical piece of like environmental justice legislation, but there's nothing radical about doing what's right and putting people's needs first. Because literally the law that we put in place made sure that money went towards each agency to make sure that, for instance, if Department of Transportation is going to put a new highway down, they have to talk to the community and think about how will this impact people's environment. That's it. And so now we've put money and time, new positions into each agency to have that conversation and critically think before moving forward. So before they make any decision, they have to think, what are the environmental justice impacts? Meaning they're thinking of people and planet before any decision. And that's what the HEAL Act ensures. And again, I'm really proud and really happy that we were able to do that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you this awesome mapping tool that we worked on. That little thing right there is actually where I live. So let's go to this real quick. Oh. And I heard that you all are working on a tool similar to this as well. So it's interesting to be able to compare them a little bit. Okay, so yeah, this is the Washington Tracking Network. This is the Environmental Justice Mapping Tool. And so you can see over here, we have these different metrics in terms of environmental health disparities, diesel pollution that you'll see like in PM, social vulnerability to COVID, social vulnerability hazards. This is one that I like to go to because especially seeing that, it highlights my community. Some of the overlays are very interesting though. Here, first I'm gonna put in my zip code. And like I said, I live in a historical Black neighborhood called the Hilltop. So I live right there in the middle of Tacoma. And then let's look at social vulnerability hazards. And so what you'll see, so if we zoom in a little bit, so we don't want it to be red. Red is not good. Red is the worst. Red means that it's a community that's usually more polluted. So this is like housing, socioeconomic. So we have all these different things here. And you can see, like, for instance, no high school diploma. That's here, it's the reddest there, unemployed. It's the reddest there as well. And so using this map though, tells us who to help. It tells us who to serve. And it's really hard looking at it sometimes because I'm like, oh, that's my community. My community's suffering the worst. My community's doing the worst. My community's not as healthy as like this dark blue community, which is actually where my father lives, which is a little bit more affluent. Like I said, 10 minutes away, his longevity in life is 10 years longer than mine. And I don't even live that far from him. And then this is the Port of Tacoma here. So this is where we have a lot of our industrial practices take place. We have a lot of our oil companies. The liquefied natural gas plant is right there. This is where we have the detention center. And then this is all Puyallup tribal land all around here. Well, what we now recognize as Puyallup tribal land, it's all Puyallup tribal land. But we have all these different barriers here as well. For instance, the tribal land boundary. So you can see where it's at. And we have some of these very interesting ones, or like, for instance, the 100-year flood zone. This is one I show folks a lot too. Another thing though that's really interesting, and we won't see it here on this particular map, but there were some metrics that we had to think about that you don't traditionally see in data. So a good example is this place called Yakima, which is in Washington state. It's in the middle of the state. We have a lot of folks who are undocumented farm workers there. And we're like, how do we count people who can't be counted with our census? How do we make sure they get the resources they need? Because a lot of the problems is that the reason we have the census is so that we make sure we know where resources go, correct? The problem is that we have folks who are just not going to be a part of that process. And that's where we figure out where a lot of our money goes. So we had to get really creative on what type of data points we were looking for. So for instance, one of the data points was how many people are listening to Spanish speaking radio stations at once? Because a lot of folks would get their news that way who lived out in Yakima Valley. So we counted up the amount of folks that were listening to Spanish speaking radio stations in a given period of time to try and count folks who we couldn't find. We had to get really creative with these types of things so that we can figure out where people are, figuring out what they need, because we know that those are the communities that need the most help. That was one of the communities that did the worst during COVID. That's one of the communities that suffered a lot when we had the wildfires on the West Coast. And that's a community that we know continues to be polluted and doesn't have a voice and isn't at the table. So this is a really interesting map. And Teresa, did you put it in the chat? Okay, cool. I just want people to have an opportunity to look at it because it's a very interesting map. Okay. Sorry, y'all. I'm trying to figure out how to get out of this map. Sorry, give me 1 second. Nope. I have the Zoom bar like right at the top of my screen, so I can't. Let me,
Are you trying to find your program again?
yeah, I was trying to get back to it because the Zoom controls are right at the top, but that's okay, I'll figure it out.
I think it's all the way there.
Okay, I got it. There we go. Okay, cool. But yeah, so having these community-driven tools, like this is a huge first step to doing intersectional environmentalism. And again, it's about doing environmentalism that works. And so, like I mentioned earlier, there's a significance to acknowledging past harm. When I joined the Environmental Justice Task Force, one of our first things were like, we need to address environmental racism. And I remember our representative who was on the Washington Farm Bureau was just like, why are we talking about racism? This is something that's so bad. We don't want this to happen, right? And I said, Well, the problem is that when we start making decisions and we start figuring out what we're going to do next, we might make the same mistakes. We might end up making, environmental decisions that don't include the people who have not been a part of this. There are people who have always been impacted more than others, and making sure that we hear what they have to say will inform our laws. Not acknowledging the colonization and like the way in which we've exploited people and the land that they live on will just continue white supremacist practices. And the solutions that we've had so far, what I like to say is like, they've been symptomatic, but they haven't gotten to the root. So they've been able to treat little symptoms here and there, saying, oh, well, we'll do this, program right here, or we might do this program here, but they only solve little problems for a moment. But the overarching climate change can be more impacted by bigger movements, by having those folks there. And there's also a significance to the culture. Like I was saying, like indigenous tribes have so many stories to tell us. I remember when I was doing research in Panama and we didn't consult Native folks who lived there and who knew more. I was like, I'm not from here and I'm coming in here doing research. I know nothing about this place, only from what I've read and researched, but these folks are going to know the best. They're going to know the best place for me to find my samples. They're going to know the best place for me to do this. And it's the same with acknowledging the culture and the storytelling. Again, with indigenous cultures, there's so many stories that have been told and passed down that are not written down. So the more we erase these folks, the more knowledge we lose too. I think what we forget is that white supremacy is bad for white folks too, because there's a culture that people have. I'm half German. And I remember my grandfather said, if I had the winds of Texas and the suns of California, I'd never use a drop of oil again. You have so many resources in that country. And there's so many stories to be told. And what happens with white supremacy is we homogenize everyone, including white folks. I have a lot of white friends who don't know where they're from. And I'm like, oh, okay, so where are you from? And they're like, I'm 4th generation Washington. I'm like, but where are you from? When we re-indigenize ourselves and acknowledge that we have a culture and that we come from somewhere, it's easier for us to understand why culture is so important to Black and Brown folks, because it's something that doesn't go away. It's something you always have. And then over here, I really like this photo because for Black people and food sovereignty, it's starting to become a bigger movement to see gardeners and farmers. But because of our past with slavery, we have run away from farms. We have tried to stay as far as we can away from gardening and planting, because the last thing we want to do is be reminded about things we were forced into. But it's something that also gives you that freedom. And then art. I think art is one of the best examples of intersectional environmentalism. Someone might say, why am I commissioning this couple $1,000 mural when we could be hiring all these scientists to do this research? The research out there, we know climate change exists. We don't necessarily need that though to change people's behavior, to change people's conservation behavior, to get them to recycle, to get them to show up and say climate change is wrong and that we need to fight it. Sometimes art and movements like the Black Lives Matter movement move people a lot more than data and words. But it's something that's necessary. These voices have been silenced for so long, but by uplifting them, we've actually been more effective. I also like to talk a lot about youth. I'm a youth mentor for a reason. I think youth voices have always been really suppressed. I know for me, I'm still young, but for years, I was absolutely silenced. And part of it is because, I was this random Black woman who's a marine biologist and people don't see that all the time. But especially when I was young, there are things I would say and I was like, no, I know what I want for my future. What I always tell people is the moment that kids started protesting, all of a sudden the whole world stopped. We look at these kids like Greta and see all this work that they've done, and their voices need to be centered because they know the world that they want to live in. And making sure that they're at the center of these movements is going to help all of us. Yeah, so here are some of the resources that I have here. I really like the first one, Intersectional Environmentalists. It's actually a fairly new organization of, I would say younger folks, but they are doing so much work, definitely support them. And then the Washington tracking data pool is right here. Go ahead and take a look at that as well. It's very interesting. And I think you also should look at some of the stuff that I know you guys are working on and compare them and see what data points you can add. But anyways, any questions? Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Emily. I know Teresa's putting all of those links in the chat here in just a moment on your resources page. So thank you.
And I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Emily. chock full of a lot of, well, intersectionality of where there's so much for us to be thinking through in our communities. And so just appreciate you bringing a lot of that to light and reminding us where there's a connected and just the value that each of our family, I meant community members, bring to our community and the value that can be. So thank you for that. I think we have one question I've seen so far that's been shared, but please, if you have other questions, send us along in the chat or directly to Teresa. But I think one question here was, are there any, let me look here, are there any negative reasons why you shouldn't create an environmental justice task force? That was the question. So
I mean, at the end of the day, there's environmental groups being created everywhere. Environmental justice is just doing it more intentionally. I think that we lose a lot of intention when we do create these groups. I mean, because now I'm sitting here like, not really, no. If it's an environmental justice focused, that's the negative part would be not being intentional about it. So if we created an environmental justice council and we only put people on there who were like, oh, I'm really into the environment, but not necessarily the people who we need. So I know there was a huge push for us. So one of the groups I worked with, Front and Centered, they've done absolutely amazing work. And they're the reason the HEAL Act really is around. But I worked with them for a very long time to make sure that we got solar panels on Shiloh Baptist Church. And it took a very long time for us because, for instance, Pastor Christopher, he was so busy trying to help people with all these different issues all the time. He's such a great guy and he'd go out his way to help all these groups. But we were like, we want to make sure the Black community is a part of this conversation and that you guys are getting the same resources and benefits. And here in Washington State, if you have a solar panel, say that you create more than you can use, you can sell it back. You also get rebates. So we're like, not only is it money coming back to your community, but it's also something that's beneficial for the environment and for all of us, because that is a community that has a lot of pollution. And so that's just the intention. And now someone like Pastor Christopher is now a part of some of these environmental justice groups. But again, it's up to people in positions of power and privilege to go out of their way to include people. And the one thing I will say is that there's a couple things to be very humble about, is that there's a lot of pain and suffering. So if you do go to someone who's from a marginalized community and you say, hey, we want you to be a part of this, do not be offended if they say, no, thank you, go away. We don't want anything to do with you. Why do you suddenly care about us now? There's so much pain and trauma that one instance of you being rejected is nothing compared to the suffering that community has faced forever. And that's always something that I remind myself, is that if someone's like, oh no, we don't really, because also too right now, we're seeing all these woke washing campaigns, oh, look, now everybody has a rainbow flag because it's Pride. Everybody has their token Black person who's speaking on behalf of their organization or company. There's a lot of tokenism out there right now. And it's about, again, your actions matching your words. And that intention is so important. So definitely go out of your way and learn more about folks. But I also tell people to do some of the work. So when people come and talk to me, I expect them to have already done work, because I'm going to this level now where I'm I as a Black woman who works in this space, I don't want people to come up to me and say, well, what are all these things I should read? Especially if it's a good friend, they come to me and they say, hey, I'm on chapter 8 of White Fragility. Can I ask you questions about this? I'm like, absolutely. It's the intention behind it and making sure that your intention is real.
Great. And that's a good reminder. If you get rejected, that doesn't, you're trying to help someone, that's part of the process. And so thank you. And it looks like, Brad, I didn't see your question. Did you have, I'm trying to see, we have just time for maybe one more question. And Brad, I'm going to go ahead and let you ask if you have it, because I know this is an area of work that you're doing also about behavioral change when it comes to climate issues.
Yeah, and just to kind of, I guess, better summarize than what I just put there in chat, but that's kind of the gist of it of, we as an organization, I'm with the Nature Conservancy. And so we are a legacy environmental organization, but also very aware that we come from a very white background, and they're painfully aware of that. And so we're looking to engage more in this, and we're starting to have some of these really, good, authentic kind of internal conversations of how we're doing it. Some of our chapters have started to reach out into those, communities of environmental justice. But we're also acknowledging too that, we may not be the best group to lead on this because we haven't been here in this space until now. So what is the best way for a group like ours or other environmental organizations that haven't been engaged in this work up until, very recently to engage? And what kind of help can we provide to those in the environmental justice movement?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. Thanks, Brad. That's awesome. I actually have a lot of TNC friends up here. They've been great advocates. Actually, the former executive director of Front and Centered is now the government relations for TNC up here. So, and that is a great way. So like hiring awesome people who've done awesome work. Front and Centered, like it's a BIPOC-led environmental justice org. And like he's the guy on everything. And he has kind of like push them really hard to their limits in terms of what they support in government, where they're like, oh, I don't know if we should do this. He's like, no, if you really want to be an ally, this is what it looks like. This is how you're supposed to do it. And doing things that, again, I don't know why things that take care of people and environment are seen as radical. It makes no sense. I was like, oh, human rights shouldn't be radical, but they are radical concepts because we've normalized oppression. And so what ended up happening was like he was in this role and he really helped elevate the org in terms of the decisions they make over here. But then also another thing is TNC up here, they show up and they show up to these spaces, these Black and brown spaces. We are lucky because we do have a lot of intersectional environmental organizations like the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition. The Duwamish tribe is a tribe that's not federally recognized, but they are very much here today. I have a lot of friends from that tribe. They do a lot of great work to clean up the river. And that organization, the last conference I went to, it was all youth led. The whole program was bilingual. They had the mayor there help sign off on policy they were working at, and TNC was there. TNC was there, a bunch of different orgs that we had like the Seattle Aquarium there. And what happens is, again, you need to show up to the room and show up to their events. So like, I know for me as a member of the Urban League, but also very much an environmentalist, even before the Urban League and a lot of Black organizations were having conversations about the environment, I was there pestering them saying, we need to talk about environment. It impacts our kids, it impacts us. And so making sure that all these events can be collaborative, making sure people are there. And so when I did an environmental justice summit where I had all Black folks who worked on different environmental issues in terms of labor, in terms of like community gardens, and in terms of housing and transit, I had the four of them speak. And even though one works in transportation and one works in labor, they talk about environment. So they intersect in their work. And so I had that happen. And then I specifically invited folks from the environmental community, but also other Black and brown communities to be there and meet. Sometimes it's about just like boots on the ground showing up. Like I know the Urban League has like a luau, and I like invited folks from the environmental group. I said, yeah, we're gonna just be dancing and eating and that's it. That's what we're just celebrating tonight. And those spaces are the most important spaces. That's why culture is important. Black and brown folks, sometimes when white folks, even if they have the best intentions, show up to our door, we sometimes don't trust them because we're like, you haven't actually been in our community spaces. You actually don't know how we celebrate. You don't know my children. You don't know who we are. Becoming family with your community members is like the key. Because the reason I can walk into so many spaces and have conversations with so many people is because I know these people. I ask about their children. I was like, how are the kids doing today? And it's really important, I think, to humanize your organization when going into those places. Sure. And like I was saying, if they're like, oh, we don't want your help, we don't want to do that, that's fine. Also, another thing that I suggest is finding a trusted member of that community group. So here, the Urban League, our former CEO and president actually became the first Black person to be senator in Washington State, Tawana Nobles. And she is someone who's really built a bridge between people. She talks to folks from the white community and invites them into Black spaces and saying, if you're going to be here, you have to be here and show up as an ally. And this is who we are and what we believe. And like, come and celebrate with us, come join us. And then we will talk to you about what your priorities are and what you see for us. And so it's relationship building. That's it.
Yeah.
You know?
That's a really good, insightful answer though. And it makes sense, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, you gotta show up. So thank you. And also as someone who grew up in the South Sound, I grew up in Sumner, right next to the Puyallup Tribe. So love the work you're doing. It's great.
Oh, awesome. You get it.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Brad, for that question as well. And we're just over time. It's been an incredible time to think through some of the things that you brought up today, Emily, and shared with us. And I hope that everyone that joined today will continue to think about these topics and what their role is and how they can be a part of not just a moment, but a movement. And I appreciate you sharing that as well. Emily, I think you can stick around for just a little bit longer after we kind of finalize. And so if people want to stick around, and we'll unmic a little bit and be a little more casual here in just a minute. But I want to thank everyone for joining us. I think there's a poll there that Megan put out there. But again, and thank you, Megan, for putting it out there and sending. We will send an email to you tomorrow with today's recording, as well as any links and resources discussed during today's events. So lots of great information today. And while you're answering this poll, I wanted to let you know June's Sustainability Challenge is to learn more about intersectional environmentalism. And tomorrow's email will also include links and reading resources for that. And so you can stay engaged on this topic, because we will come back around to it as well. And we want to make sure that our community continues to raise their own level of awareness and engagement around this. Teresa, I will put a link in there for the Facebook group, another great way to stay engaged on this topic and chat. Again, this is a connection point with your community and ways to, for recommendations and share how you can learn along the way. I think I don't know if we shared, but yes, we shared that the challenge there. And last month was about posting a picture of a monarch waste station plant or something in a habitat garden. So hopefully people
a pollinator garden.
Yeah, thank you. Again, thank you to our sponsors, lead sponsor Williams, our neighborhood partners, PSO of Oklahoma and PSO WinChoice, our community advocates, American Waste Control, Cavanta, the Met, One Oak, Save Our Streams, Spirit Aerosystems, Tulsa Farmers Market. Thank you so much. Thank you to each of you for being a part of today. I look forward to seeing you at our next First Thursday on July 1st. So have a great rest of the day, and stick around for a minute if you can. And we appreciate Emily just sticking around a little bit more to talk with us. So thank you again for being a part of First Thursday with Sustainable Tulsa.